Thanks everyone for coming to this week's CHEP seminar. We have Scott Carrell here this week from the University of California, Davis. Scott is an expert in the economics of education. He has published widely. We were just talking about it in the Grand Slam of American top 5 general economics journals, an incredible record. And this week he's here to talk about some new experimental evidence on the impact of faculty engagement with students on academic performance. Scott, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've known of Joe's work for a very long time, and I know many of his co-authors, but I had never actually sat down and talked to him before today, so it's definitely a pleasure to be here. San Diego is one of my favorite towns in the entire United States. I'm actually coming back next week for Thanksgiving, so come here a couple times a year. And I gave a talk, I think, here at San Diego State about 2010, and I don't know, is Jennifer here? She was going to try to make it. So I think everybody else, maybe Shoshana, is no longer at San Diego State except for her. So it's exciting to be here. This is a very different type of project than much of my work. If you're familiar with what I've done, and as we age, you know, our interests change, and I certainly believe in social spillovers, and so I can give a lot of this project to my co-author, who's her name is Michal Kurlander. So she's Israeli. She often gets called Michael, but it's Michal, and she's in the School of Education at UC Davis. And the two of us, along with another co-author, Paco Martorell, founded what's called the California Education Laboratory at UC Davis, which essentially is taking all the California's K-12 DOE data. We've merged it with all the CSU data, all the 23 CSUs. We're working on. We got some of the UCs. We've matched it, spent about $1 million matching it to the National Clearinghouse data on college going, and we're really interested in college access and persistence in California. This is one small project that we started working on about 5 years ago, and Michal came to me, and I'm going to be a little cynical about economists, so for the non-economists here, you probably can understand this. Economists, at least, in about 2008, got into what I call this cottage industry of how do we get more kids to go to college? And including myself and my co-author Bruce Sasserdale, we just thought of some ideas and went out and started running randomized control trials. And Phil Oreopoulos has this great paper, and basically what he finds is it's really hard to replicate a lot of studies that are going on in RCT education interventions. And Michal came to me and said, well, she wanted to start with a problem, and she spent a long time working with the CSUs, looking at persistence at the CSUs in California. And if you're not aware, particularly African American and Hispanic men at the CSUs have abysmal graduation rates, less than 40% 6-year graduation rates. So she came with so let's do something about low graduation rates at the CSUs. And I said, oh great, what should we do? And she says, I don't know, let's go talk to people. I'm like, oh, talk to people. Economists don't do that. So we partnered up with the Center for College and Career Readiness at Sacramento State University and went and talked to kids and bought them pizza and did 3 focus groups and just asked them about their experiences and what things that helped them succeed in college and their experiences. And and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But we started with a qualitative approach to find out, what students thought. We then took that information, designed a light touch intervention, which I then piloted in my class at UC Davis. One, to see if it worked and how it would work. So we tested it, found some very interesting results. We then wrote a grant, got a chunk of money to then implement it large scale at a CSU. Went out and did that with about 40 faculty members across 2 semesters. 4,000 students in the intervention, total found some different results than we expected, so then I went back and re-replicated my pilot this last spring. So you're only about the third group of people that have seen this whole presentation. Like a lot of my work, I tend to not find what I expect in all situations, and so really be interested to get your feedback, given that you're at a CSU here, and many of you, or if not all of you, teach the types of students that we were trying to target here. So that's what this is. If this wasn't going on the website, I would say my professor is paid to care, because that's what we end up doing, is paying professors to interact with their students. And I think that may be part of the story. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CSU and the policy. I'll go through that relatively quick. We did the focus groups. I did the first pilot in 2014. So many of you in this room are planning on going in to get a PhD. It's 2014 and now we're over 5 years later. We still don't have a even full draft of the paper. So one thing I've learned over time is when you do these large scale experiments, they take a long time. So if you're trying to go up for tenure, starting experiments may not be the best strategy. You got to have multiple different types of projects. We scaled this up at a California State University in the spring of 2016, fall of 2017. Like I said, we found some different results. I re-replicated myself this last spring, and then I'll conclude it, and hopefully with a discussion. Haven't really fully figured out how to take all these results and wrap it up into a paper and what to think about it. So looking forward to hearing your feedback. As I mentioned, there's low persistence and degree completion, particularly at the more non-selective universities. The CSUs that we'll focus on have a wide array of selectivity. San Diego State is one of the more selective of the CSUs. But high rates of remedial and developmental education. The CSUs are going through reforms on how to handle remedial education, which have done some work with. These outcomes, big differences across race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. California gets a lot of attention, basically because the CSUs are the largest university system in the country. And I can't remember, I think 1 in 20 four-year college students attends a CSU in the country or something crazy like that. It's a massive amount of students who attend four-year colleges in the CSU system. I don't have to tell everybody here, but there's this tiered system that started in 1960. We've done a lot of work evaluating the community college system. So I have a couple of papers looking at community college quality and student outcomes. And the key advantage of our research that we've been doing in California is we've been able to link all the K-12 data to student outcomes. So it's hard to study community college students because you don't really know much about them. We've been able to link their 11th grade test scores and what they've done in high school to try to better evaluate, what goes on at the community colleges.
Just a question about the trends sort of on the previous slide. So to what extent has sort of the descriptive work found that these declines in retention rates and falling graduation rates are sort of conditional on sort of test scores of kids, or is this changing the selection of kids who are going to it?
So I don't have an exact answer for you. What I can tell you is over time, college going rates have increased. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but more and more kids are going to college each year, but about the same number of kids are graduating from college. So clearly, graduation rates have fallen doing that mathematics. But I don't have all the exact numbers. How much of it is, I've got a slide here about what's driving that. A big chunk of it has to be academic preparation. When looking at the measures, I think about 70% of the students in our sample were required to take either remedial English or remedial math upon entering the CSU that we look at. So a lot of students are coming to college unprepared. We just are, I think in the next 2 days, have what's PACE, which is out I can't remember the acronym. It's a policy brief on college readiness in California. So we've taken a couple cohorts, one cohort of students, and then looked at, based on the college and career readiness indicators and other aspects, only about 40% of high school seniors are deemed college ready in the state of California. But many, I can't remember the total college going rate, it's about 2/3, a little over 2/3 of students actually go to college. So a big chunk of them, even by the state standards, are not deemed college ready. So that's a big chunk of it. California, as you may know, is diverse, and it's getting more diverse. In the most recent statistics, I think 52% of high school juniors in our data are Latinx, and becoming more and more diverse each year. This is looking at all the CSU-wide system data. Persistence and completion rates. So it turns out, and we find this at the CSU that we study, most students persist. And in fact, what I found is, in looking at these data, most students persist 3 years. Not many students graduate at 4 years. Although there's a lot of focus on 4-year graduation rates, seems like a futile goal to me, given how low the 4-year graduation rates are. And the 6-year graduation rates are quite low across the system, although they are rising moderately, over time. Big differences across race and ethnicity. And if you looked at, by and large, I don't know if this would surprise anyone, but if you split this by gender, males in every category do worse than females. So, 42% of African American students graduate within 6 years. The CSU, if you look, there's a big gap between African American male and females, with males being doing significantly worse than females. That was the group that we originally said, let's try to target males in these two groups, underrepresented males, because they are graduating in the 30% range, 35%, less than 40%. So why is this? We just brought this up a little bit. Well, there's a lot of reasons, and if we knew, we'd probably be able to fix it much easier. But it's a complex issue. Many students who are academically qualified don't succeed. If you take and regress freshman grades on everything you know about students, their SAT scores, their high school GPA, their race, their gender, their parental income, you can just throw the kitchen sink at a regression. You can only account for about 25 to 30% of the variation in freshman grades. Most is unexplained, and what's in that unexplained? There's motivation, maturity, shocks, negative shocks to family. And so a lot of things go into this. We've tried focusing our lab on what can we do about it. It's tough to move the academic preparation of students out of high school in the short run, but you can affect institutional policies and practices once the students get there. And so that's been a focus that we've tried to look at within our lab. You notice I cite no one, so I offend everyone or I offend no one here. Because there is a substantial body. How I would summarize the research, about 10 years ago, economists in particular were focused on how do we get more kids to go to college. And there was a lot of movement to that, and now the movement's been, once they, we got more kids to go to college, but once they get there, how do we get them to stay, persist, and graduate? And so I won't talk about all the key determinants. Other than I've got two main takeaways. One is it's hard to move the needle on persistence. Light touch interventions have been real popular, texting interventions, and I think the bottom line is it's really hard to move the needle on persistence by having a light touch intervention. That's one thing that I would say, and the second thing, which is sort of the opposite, that at least my feeling is that I call it, I spent 20 years in the military, so a military, you gotta have a boots on the ground approach, so to speak. I didn't come up with that, Joe was at the military academy, but Bruce Sasterdo, who's worked with Air Force and Army data, came up with this when we wrote our paper, a boots on the ground approach. And probably the best study that I'm most excited about that I've read in terms of college access and persistence is this paper by Andrew Barr and Ben Castleman. It's called Bottom Line, and they provide counseling services at high school and then follow them through college. And they're finding the combination of taking these low-income, at-risk students, providing them counseling services in high school, and then following them and keep, providing services while they're at school. That combination seems to get them and keep them in college seems to be very promising.
Quick question, Scott. When you say persistence in this context, do you mean the persistence that you showed us in the graph before, where those are continuing beyond 2 years? Or here are you using this inclusively to say, making it there and also then graduating within a reasonable time period?
I'm taking a whole encompassing approach to. I was actually surprised looking at the data how many students persist beyond 2 years and then don't graduate. I think generally when we talk about persistence in the literature, some people will look at 1 year persistence, some will look at graduation rates. Often studies get published before you actually see the final outcome of graduation because as you know as much as anyone in this room, you have a ticking clock, right? And so if you went and implemented a study, you can't wait 6 years before your tenure is decided. So you end up publishing a lot of this work. I guess the advantage is you can publish the 1 year persistent rate, and then you can come back after tenure and publish the longer. When you're around long enough like me, you can look at the long run effects of your initial papers. Which I have now done. So that officially makes you old when you do a study that looks at contemporaries findings of 3rd through 5th graders, and then you look at their labor market outcomes. That makes you As I mentioned, we did these focus groups. It was actually very enlightening and interesting, and there was like I said, there was no silver bullet that said here's exactly what you need to do. But there was this theme. There was a large. I saw a very common theme of students who came in, struggled, then went to the community college. California is unique in that it has this very integrated system where classes transfer particularly easy from the community college to the CSUs and the UCs. So they would struggle, they would leave, go to the local community college, then come back. And some of these students had gone back and forth several times, which clearly slows them down. Many of them were in the remedial classes like I mentioned. But a very common thing was they felt like they did better. Their perception was they did better when they were connected somehow to the faculty. And so we took from this, let's try to focus on faculty engagement. And so then we just brainstormed what can faculty do differently. It's hard to get faculty to do much. They're the kingdom of their classroom. And so we designed an experiment or an intervention focused on basically these 3 questions. 1, can you improve engagement in the course? Does this engagement does it actually improve the student's self-perception of information and their ability to help themselves? And then, if you can do that, does it help students, who and why? And so we started off and we did a light touch intervention in my own class at UC Davis in the spring of 2014. One thing that I learned, and which I'll talk about over time, is I'm a person who studies economics of education. I went and did this. I had 420 students in the class. And part of that, I think the story is how the professor responds. And it's unclear. We don't know exactly when we scale this up how each individual professor responds. But I can tell you that there was an endogenous response from me in my own effort. You send an intervention targeting students, and then they respond, and then you increase your own effort. So there's clearly, depending on each individual professor responds and what they're currently doing, I could imagine why we find different effects across different types of professors. So my pilot was 2 personalized emails during the term providing feedback on how to be successful in the class. I then gave them targeted feedback after the first midterm on where they stand in the class. And importantly, I gave them tools of how they can improve, and then signaled, hey, come see me, go see your TAs, etc. I talk about how I drew up the sample, which also may explain some of the differences we find when you scale this up. Because every class is different, who needs help is different, how you target these individuals.
To what extent, maybe you'll talk about this when you talk about the larger scale sort of design, is because in reading about this pilot that you've just described with several hundred students, right? I mean, given some of the students' responses that we sort of read on some of these evaluations, clearly one of the things they appreciated was sort of conditional on the size of the class, this massive class, that their professor would take the time to single them out out of 400 students for a personalized note. So were some of the interventions in the larger scale one in a smaller sort of class size, or expectations for students about interaction with the professor might have differed?
Yes, I don't want to take the punchline.
Oh.
What I will tell you is the answer is yes, we had variation in size. One main difference between my classes, I was targeting a smaller group, so there's potential for spillovers. You know, when other students hear, are you getting an email? I'm not. I think that was a really low probability in my class because I targeted in that initial pilot 35 out of 420 students, so it's low probability. Certainly it seems like the larger the class, the more meaningful the feedback is because the students don't expect it. But I will say, you know, I think probably one of the more interesting aspects of this presentation is going to be the comments that I received and the other professors received. So we get very similar, a lot of gratitude. Thank you for reaching out to me, these types of comments. But I think there is a potential for stereotype threat as well. You got some students who appeared to be like, why are you reaching out to me? Taken aback by it. So it's not a clear cut, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Especially when the professor is paid to care and they mistime the email and it comes across awkward. We worked a lot, that's why we did it another semester to try to clean up the fidelity of the implementation. Now it turns out that didn't seem to affect the results. We find the same thing each time we did it, but if that makes sense. The key here, and I'll just point out, taking social psychology, we're trying to focus on positive steps rather than pointing out shortfalls. Pointing out concern, here's some things you can do and I do really think that, at least in my case, the intervention prevented people from packing it in and giving up. All right, so as I mentioned, UC Davis, really small pilot, and how I drew the sample was I noticed, and I've changed the way I did the course, I had to do the pilot a different way the second time. So how I did it the first time is I used my econ lab. I had 420 students, and observationally looking at historically, students who didn't do homework number 1 scored about 10 percentage points less in their final grade in my class on a mean of about 70%. So this is pretty large differences in overall performance. And the first homework is not mandatory in the fact that there were 7 homework assignments at the time. To get 100% of the credit on the homework, you only had to do 5 of the 7, and it was pass-fail. So I just provided an incentive for students to do homework. I sensed students who didn't do the first homework were the slackers. It happened to be the longest one, and it also covered supply and demand. So it's like the most critical thing. If you don't understand supply and demand in Econ 1A, the rest of the course is going to be pretty difficult. So I had 70 students or 69 students out of 420 who did not do homework number 1. One thing I learned, and which we fixed for the experiment, some of these students didn't do homework 1 because they already dropped my class. So if you're going to run an experiment, wait till the drop ad is over and then draw your sample, because you won't have as much power as you anticipated. Dropping was negatively associated with this experiment. So fewer students who received the email, it wasn't significant, dropped the class. So if anything, there might be a negative bias on our results because the marginal student was induced to stay in the class. Although with such a small sample, it's only a couple students difference. I had a lot of outcomes that I was able to examine in this because it was my own class versus the large scale experiment. I had 2 midterms and a final. I had these homework assignments. I could actually look at the time they spent. So if you use my econ lab, turns out you can look at how much time are students spending on the homework. Now, you don't know if it's meaningful time or not. It could be they just keep it open and But I don't think the students, I never knew until I did this experiment and downloaded the data, it tracks how much time they spend on that. And then after the fact, we went to the university, we were able to match the background characteristics. So I didn't have all this when we did the randomization, although we can show that the randomization works using these background characteristics. I then kept a log, I kept a log of office hours. I also had my TAs keep logs in their office hours to then try to look at some mechanisms. I then put some questions on the final exam about whether or not they thought I cared. Turns out not everybody thinks I care.
Are there any dual enrollment programs at UC Davis where you can like go to the main campus but also take classes at a community college nearby or anything like that?
Well, the short answer is students do take community college classes, and they easily transfer back in. I think this is what I'm a little confused about, and I should know this. I don't know if it is as common. Students definitely take summer classes, to get caught up, or if they have academic difficulty. There is a Sac City campus center on the UC Davis campus. So how many students are doing that, I don't know. So do you have a specific question around that?
I'm just thinking like in Texas, just about every school, you have conditional acceptance to a university where you might take one class at the main campus and then the rest of your freshman year classes at the local community college.
No, UC Davis does not do that model.
Okay.
Although because of the way the system's set up, it's very easy to take classes in the summer and then transfer them back in. As I mentioned, students were randomly assigned. I picked the 70 students who didn't do homework number 1, randomly selected half of them, and then what we find is the randomization worked. This is a regression of treatment status on their background characteristics. A couple things again, I had quite a few students who dropped the class. Fortunately, none of these characteristics are correlated with treatment. You're going to see I have in all my regressions I had 4 different TAs, and so I condition out TA fixed fixed. It turns out they don't matter so much, but I do get a little more precision when I look at include TA fixed effects. For anybody who's into econometrics, this is as difficult as this paper is going to get. I have outcomes regressed on a treatment dummy. It doesn't matter if I control for background characteristics. Why? Because I have randomization. So these X's, I have small samples, so they do matter a little bit, but not, in theory they don't matter at all. And so I'll show you with and without controls in all my specifications, and that's the TA fixed effects. Underpowered experiment used to motivate the study. The results I thought were pretty powerful given the small sample size. So recall I gave email 1 was, which I meant to talk about this. So email 1 was, hey, I noticed you didn't do homework number 1. Although it's not required to earn all the points on the homework, it's really important, particularly for the first exam, as supply and demand is the main thing you need to know in this class. Even though you can't earn the points, I recommend you go back and look at it. Come see me, etc. And I had students apologizing for not doing homework number 1. I had a student that ran after me outside the class saying, I'm so sorry I didn't do the homework. Really appreciate the email. I'm going to come see you office hours this week. Then she never came. This is a common theme. A lot of students would tell me they're going to come see me and they didn't. But this simple email induced pretty significant increased effort. So recall it's pass-fail. To earn all the points for the homework, you have to get 50% of the points correct. The control group mean per assignment, 2 through 7, is 55%. So a lot of students respond to the incentive of meeting the minimum bar and then they stop. Students in the treatment group, 15 percentage points more of the questions answered correctly on the pass-fail homework. So now this is the points earned. Most of the students do at least 5 of the 7. That's what this is saying. So there's not a significant treatment effect. Basically everybody in the control group for the most part did at least 5 of the 7. a few people in the treatment group, a few people in the control group did not. It's noisy, but this means 2 hours of increased effort on homeworks 2 through 7, and this is just looking at the median time spent per homework, 20 minutes, roughly. Then, after midterm number 1, I sent targeted feedback about how the students did on midterm 1. So based on your score, I would give them, hey, I'm worried about you. If they did C- or lower, I'm worried about your performance. Don't give up. There's still 70% of the points still remaining in the course. We have another midterm, a final, and all the homework. Please come see me. Please go see your TAs. Here's on our online course system. I had practice exams, ungraded practice homeworks. Do use these resources, etc. Lo and behold, I gave that feedback right here, and this is like a massive effect that I found. 13 percentage points on a mean at 68% on exam number 2. Exam number 2 is generally more difficult. It's on the production side, and so I was like, wow. I sent an email to give feedback after midterm 1. There wasn't, it's a moderately sized effect, insignificant for midterm 1, but then giving the targeted feedback on midterm 2, and I found this massive effect, and I said, and then I didn't do anything else. I didn't know that this existed, the lags in getting data and running regressions. I ran these regressions after the course was over. At the time I said, wow, I wish I would have given a third email after midterm 2, because it looks like it faded away. It's still, moderately sized on a mean of 64, 5 percentage point, but it's noisy. Across all exams, and then the total score in the course, almost an 8 percentage point effect, so it's about 10% in the course, which led to a half a letter grade increase by the time I implemented the curve and everything.
So in terms of that email, just trying to get at sort of the information in this email. Well, actually, whether it was information, you're providing links to the. How
I'm not giving links.
Okay, so I'm just.
I say SmartSite was we use Canvas now, but at the time it was SmartSite. SmartSite has I talked about the resources that every student in the course knew about.
Okay.
Or should have known.
So
about.
so that's the question. How do the rest of the students sort of know?
It's on the syllabus. I tell the first day of class, my first slide, my intro classes, here's all the resources for you. It was basically reminding them of the resources that I talked about on the first day of class. Also reminded them when my office hours were, and I can't remember if I said, if you're I don't think I was afraid to say, if you're unable to come, let me know another time. Although many students do that once you reach out to them. I can't come to your office hours. This is part of the endogenous response. I can't come to your office hours because I have another class. Can you meet me at another time? And then you feel obligated to say yes, right? So my office hours doubled, tripled in, particularly this last spring when I re-replicated myself. Yep.
You thought, so the big effect you find on midterm 2, and then kind of the lack of an effect on the final exam, do you have any sense if that's, you can tell two stories there. One is a salience effect, and then the other would be kind of a dynamic updating effect, right? So the salience is, I get this information shock, great, it's fresh in my mind, I'm gonna work really hard. But by the time you get to the final exam, you forgot about that email that was sent after the first. The other one would be dynamically, oh, look, I did better because I got this email. So, and I didn't get an email now, which means I think I'm right where I should be, or something like that. And that's the dynamic update.
I think, behaviorally, there's always regression to the mean. I think we all believe, students who get an A think, oh, I'm going to get an A, and they probably reduce their effort. There's trade-offs, and I try to talk about good economic decisions, so they're probably shifting their effort to some other class optimally. At least, we like to think that we teach students that. But so it's probably a little of both. I don't know for sure. I can't really tease that out. But yeah.
Are you able to observe the time spent on the homework, like before the second midterm versus between the second midterm and the
Yeah, I could, but I haven't done that. It's a good idea.
So, who received the second email? Was it only the students who didn't complete the first homework and who then also didn't do well in the midterms. So could you?
No, if a student, all students who were in the treatment group and didn't do homework 1 received the initial email, hey, you didn't do the homework. All of those students, regardless of their performance on midterm 1, received an email. So if the students did well, I said, hey, congratulations, keep up the good work.
Okay.
If you want to continue to do well, and then I gave them the same resources. The students who were in the C range, hey, you didn't do bad. You're probably sitting in the C range. If you want to improve, here's some resources. And the low end was, hey, I'm worried about you. Come see me. Here's some resources.
So even the students who did well on the first midterm, getting that second email still improved their second midterm.
Yeah, as you were asking that question, I didn't look to see. I mean, clearly there's a ceiling effect. If a student got 100%, they can't get better. But I don't think up until this last year, no one had ever gotten 100% on it. I've gotten soft over my time. Either the students at Davis are gotten better, I've gotten softer because they did way better in my class this last semester than they did at this point. I was known as a pretty hard grader. Yeah. You want to ask? Yeah, I think you had your hand up first.
Do you have a sense of the students' workload? Coming from UC, I don't remember having a lot of midterm 2s. They're like midterm 1 and the final in like this 10-week period. Do you know a lot of these students also had classes that also had midterm 2s that forced them to, or that didn't have midterm 2s, so they could focus more on your midterm 2?
I have no idea. My perception, at least within the economics department, is most classes have at least 2 midterms. I know chemistry, biology, all the main core courses, freshman level, all have 2 midterms. I've actually now gone to 3 midterms. The main reason I think professors, as class sizes have gotten larger, you have to deal with students who miss class. If they're on an athletics team or club, they often will miss class. The last thing professors seem to want to do is write, me included, is write makeup exams. So the standard thing that professors do is, okay, I'm going to double count second midterm if you missed midterm 1, or I'm going to upweight. So I think the standard at UC Davis is 2 midterms and a final. I've now gone to 3, in a 10-week period, I gave 3 midterms and a final. And this is where I've gotten soft, and then I dropped the lowest scoring one. And students don't understand curves, so this makes them feel better, right? I'm always getting nervous that this is going to be put up on TV. Then I tried to look at mechanisms. Underpowered, not a whole lot of results here. In this pilot, I did not have a massive response to office hours, although when I redid it the second time, I don't know if I've changed over a 5-year period, and I didn't keep the log. I internally felt like there was a massive response to office hours the second time I did this. I did ask the students about whether they said I cared. This is positive and noisy. A common thing you're going to see in both the scale up and this is it doesn't seem to motivate people all that much. They feel better about the course. They feel like there's more information they're receiving. But I'm not sure at least they don't say they work a ton harder. A little bit of response to TA office hours. And as I mentioned, there was this negative effect on dropping out. The students in the treatment group were slightly less likely to drop out of the course, which might make us think that all my effects were underestimated. At least that's what I thought. The marginal student who stayed in the class, I expected to be a lower performing student. So this is some of the fun stuff. How much time do I have, by the way?
45, so another half
Okay.
hour.
All right. So I'm gonna speed up. So a lot of thank yous. I'd like to thank you. Such a kind manner. You have a couple hundred students. Some apologies. Also some honesty. I'm just too busy to spend too much time on my work. I really do appreciate what you're doing and wish more professors did what you're doing. So we took all this, I'm gonna speed this up, but we took this as promising. We took the results from this, we wrote up a grant, got funded by the College Futures Foundation to study this at a large CSU campus, where about half the students are from underrepresented backgrounds, because most of the students have remedial education when they enter, and because of the 2/3 of the students are most of them are first generation college, and many are underrepresented minorities. We did not draw our sample in a similar manner to my pilot, where we targeted like a first assignment. I wish, in retrospect, maybe we would have done that, but we decided many with a 40% graduation rate or 50% graduation rate, we thought, let's just see what the average effect of this intervention is at this university. An important thing to do when you're doing any experiment is have a partner. The Campus Center for College and Career Readiness was a huge partner. They provided us 2 master's level students who acted as RAs. We also had 2 graduate students from UC Davis that helped implement this, work with the professors, help professors write and send the emails. So there's a lot of hand-holding. Quickly, lots of relatively high, the bar looks low, but it's still 80%, about 80% first year retention. 3-year retention, still 2/3 of the students are hanging around, and it varies across demographic. But then 6 years later, like I mentioned, about 40% of underrepresented and about 50% of African American and Latino students graduate within 6 years. So we did this twice. You always learn from implementation the first time around, so we made some slight changes. A couple of things that we did is the first time around, we didn't realize classes were so much smaller at this university relative to UC Davis. Large classes are 80 to 100 students, so that was one huge difference from my class. We worked and had the provost send a letter out to 42 faculty members who were teaching these freshman level courses, gen ed courses, invited them to participate. We then met with faculty members, showed up. We got about half the professors to participate. I don't know if it's because it was the spring and we paid the professors and they want to pay off their Christmas credit card bills. But we had higher participation rate in this round than we did in the fall. It's harder to find professors in the summer to do an intervention in the spring. We tried focusing on even larger classes based on what we found here. Let's try to get as close to Scott Carrell's pilot. So we started with the largest classes. We were also concerned about spillovers, so we did a matched pair design of professors teaching the same class twice, and then we randomly selected one of those classes and then treated all the students to avoid spillovers. And we invited 38 faculty members to participate in the fall of 2017. We had half the faculty member participate here. Only 13 of the 28, I guess about half both times, or 13 of 38 in the second time around. All the professors received $500 cash stipend to participate and a research assistant to help them out, and they would meet with them whenever they wanted. The first round, we actually paid them an additional $100 to fill out a survey to get their perceptions, so I'll show you some of those. Although by and large, most of the professors thought this was great, they felt it was great. What you're going to see is the students thought it was great, felt it was great. But the final results aren't as promising as what I found in my paper. So it's not because we don't have a diverse set of classes. We had professors from many different disciplines. Most of these are freshman level courses. I don't really know the numbering system, whether 50 is an upper division, but a lot of intro classes, including econ, math, history, etc. As I mentioned, the design was a little bit different. We randomly selected about half the students in the 24 classes in the spring. We were worried about, well, is there spillovers? We heard a couple anecdotal stories of one student came into the professor and said, hey, my friend got an email about their performance. How come I didn't? We don't think that was systematic, but we were concerned about that, so we focused on these large classes. Instead of doing half, we did a third. We also, the first time around, the professor sent an introductory email. Welcome to my class, to do well, and gave them feedback right on the first day. Some of the students, seemed surprised by getting this email. So the second time around, we focused on performance on the first assignment, more similar to my class. All of these little things ultimately did not make a difference. I've got ahead of myself. So introductory email in the first few weeks. Email 2 was feedback on performance about halfway through the semester. And then email 3, we thought my class, I wish I would have done an email before the final exam, so we added that as a third email. Second time around, we focused on the first major assignment, like my missed homework, but we gave them feedback on that. Again, feedback about halfway through the course, and then an email final before the final exam. These are some templates. We gave templates to the professors, although we stressed make it in your own words, make it applicable to your class. A few of the professors, we got feedback, or it seemed like did not adapt these to their own words, and it felt a little, trying to think of the right word, fake.
Scripted.
On a few cases. So we really worked hard. I actually presented the second time around when we met with the professors to draw, to participate. I actually presented them the results of the first experiment, explained to them concerns about fidelity of the implementation. I showed them the pilot, showed them results from this. Say, it's really important that this is in your own language, it's meaningful, it's tailored to your class. So we know that the second time around we had better messaging, although we found no difference in the results. Here's some summary statistics. Students at this university have relatively low SAT scores. The national average is 1050. California average is 1070. So these are on SAT scores below average. Students, diverse set of students. Oops. This is our randomization checks. So this is phase 1, phase 2. Randomization worked. Again, we did not have characteristics of the student when we did the randomization. After the fact, there's a couple stars here when you combine them. Treatment is positively correlated with Latino and female, although we control for all these things and our point estimates don't move in the actual regression. We then surveyed all the students. If you've done much surveying, it's really hard to get students to respond to your survey. Turns out they like Amazon gift cards, so for the classes we were able to go in to the classroom and kick the professor out. We didn't tell them why we were there. Just said we had these students go in and say, I'm a researcher studying college outcomes, and we gave them the survey and we raffled off at the end of the survey a $50 Amazon gift card. You get about 100% response rate of students who show up to class. Trying to email them in the summer, like we did here, yields about a 20% response rate. This is overall average 34%, but about 80% of students came to class, and if we were in that class, we got 100% of those in those classes to respond. Fortunately, our survey response is not correlated with treatment, which I'll show you in a second. But here's a list of the questions we asked. How approachable was the instructor? Available? How much they cared? How useful was the feedback? How well did you felt you were kept informed? How positive was the climate? How supported did you feel? Would you take another class in this subject? How easy was the class? How motivated you were, and how challenging did you find the material? So these are the outcomes of students' perceptions that I'll show you. Again, response rate was relatively low, but fortunately, well, not surprisingly, students who have better grades are more likely to fill out the survey. Doesn't surprise us. But importantly, it's uncorrelated with treatment. So I'm going to show you our treatment effects for the students who answered the survey, controlling for characteristics and not controlling for characteristics. The point estimates don't move, which is reassuring that that we feel like they're a meaningful, measure. That's certainly not perfect. This should look familiar. Control for X's, instead of TA fixed effects, we're just going to do faculty by semester fixed effects. So it's within class research design or within professor research design with a matched pair. All right, so result number 1. If you are a professor and you want to improve the perceptions that students have of you, i.e. your evaluations, reaching out to students and telling them you care and giving them feedback on how they're doing will moderately, these aren't massive, this is on a 1 to 5 scale, so these are not massive effects, but they're certainly statistically significant on approachable availability, how much they cared, how well they felt. The largest coefficient is how useful was the instructor's feedback. How well informed, again, one of the larger coefficients. The climate, how well they felt supported, how likely are you to take another class in the subject? Nada. So it doesn't make them want to take another class in your subject. It's not a way to increase majors in economics, if that's what you're trying to do. How easy? Now maybe this is part of the problem. They said it was easier. It was easier to keep up with the workload, but they were no more motivated to do the work. And they actually, if you take that literally, they thought it was slightly less challenging. So students' perceptions overall are quite positively related to treatment. Unfortunately, student performance is absolutely, it's not even a zero, it's a tight zero. I have 3 outcomes. This is their grade on a 4.0 scale. This is percentage of points earned in the course. This is about as tight of a zero as you'll find in an economic study. On a, 1 percentage point with a standard error of 1 percentage point. So meaning we can rule out effect sizes of about 3 percentage points. Same for the subsample of where we have the final exam. So this is, because we thought the final exam would be a measure of actual learning throughout the entire course. We absolutely find nothing of that group. Whether or not they passed, nothing. Whether or not they got an A, nothing. Whether or not they dropped the course, nothing. Now we did the, not surprisingly, we did the, this would be withdrawals because we did the sample after the drop add. Other course grades. So this, shift effort or away or from, to or from, other course, and the answer is no. So that was their GPA in the same semester of all the other courses they were taking. Now, because we initially were interested in African American and Latino students, I'm going to show you, the rest of this is going to be breaking out by different things. I didn't, pre-register. Actually, what we did think that this would affect freshman students, and so there is one interesting finding there. Slightly bigger effect for Latino students, if, at least this one, it's small sample, I don't have the end, I don't know where the ends are, but this is only about 7% of our sample, so it's a really small sample size. Female students, larger effect than male. This seems to be a theme in my research that interventions more positively affect female students than male students. You can't get males to care as much as females, I guess.
Why do you get that negative effect among black students when they didn't like the feedback?
So I don't know, if you think about, our sample is 7% African American, and then we only had about a 25% response rate. This is so few students, I don't want to overinterpret one coefficient. It clearly is not, these are all negative coefficients. Little concerned about stereotype threat. At least social psychologists said, well, a white or a non-African American professor sends an email that says, hey, I'm concerned about your performance, then there's a stereotype threat,
So yeah,
potentially.
that was the question about
Yeah.
sort of characteristics of the instructor,
Right.
sort of match with the student. So do you?
I show that. I got some more work to do on it, but I do the match effects. If an African American professor sends an email to an African American student, we find nothing.
And
Nothing there.
in gender, nothing
No,
interesting.
nothing. Here is grades by rate. You just see the lack of stars. There's not a whole lot here. These are the grade outcomes. If you squint, you'd say, well, this maybe is effect. It's 1/5 the size of my initial pilot, and it's noisy. So we do not find any evidence here. Now when I split by first-year students or students that have less than 30 units, we start seeing larger effect sizes. This is the perceptions of the students. So these are 50% larger in magnitude than the average effect. And again, you see larger effects for students with, we don't have a good measure of freshmen. You have transfer students, so that's the first, this could be first year out of the community college there or first year. And so we said, well, who are our inexperienced students? So we have students less than 30 units. Also, if you look at ability, these perception effects are largely driven by higher ability students rather than lower ability. If you look above median GPA, above median SAT, largely driven by higher ability students in our sample. When you look at the grade effects, the only two groups, if you look at grade here and grade here, are the freshman students. Again, they're about a half to a third the size of my pilot. But if there is any promise, it's on these lower ability students. I mean, not lower experienced students, sorry. Freshman students or students who are new to the university. Here's your, this is the Latino interaction with the Latino professor. We only have 3 Latino professors, so it's underpowered. We have 4 African American professors, 8 Asian, if anything, that one's negative, 18 white, and 15 female. And what you see is that triple interaction is 0 across all those groups. Now, one thing that it's slightly different, it's related, but it's different. Someone said, well, maybe if the white professor reaches out to the minority student, maybe they're going to react. So I could do that, not your own race, which I have not worked on. Given all the other results, I'm not convinced that we'll find anything, but it's certainly worth looking at. So I got about 13 minutes. A lot of these, a little more apologizing, although I got a lot of students that apologized to me as well. Some students, a lot of positive. This student said, I was wondering if maybe the system is not showing that I'm present, but like I said, I've not missed a day. So they're like, why are you emailing to me? Because I've been coming to class. So there was a little shock, some students were surprised. Again, this one, hello professor, I was wondering why I was sent this message. I believe that I've been coming to class regularly and taking notes. Thank you for your time. It wasn't a majority of the students, but some of the students were surprised. Especially, maybe the higher ability students were even more surprised that they were receiving this because they're not used to it. The difference being mine was targeted as, hey, you didn't do the first homework. So they weren't surprised. Or maybe they were surprised, but they felt there was a reason they got the email. I apologize for my poor performance. I attend every class, go to review sessions, I've turned in the extra credit, and I'm also defiantly trying to do well, but I'm still I'd like to thank you. So, what did the faculty say? Almost all of them were positive. This was our first insight on fidelity. A couple were concerned why they had received this first email. This is because it went out after the first midterm, but it was really a welcome to the class email, so the disconnect worried them. Okay, so this is why I went and talked to the professors the second time around and said, hey, this has got to be natural, it's got to be meaningful. We're going to pay you the $500 regardless. Don't make it a negative, you don't want to scare your students away. Make it be like you would talk in your class each day, so they're not surprised as well. I'll skip this given I'm running out of time. All right. We got to the end of this and said, what do we do with this? Was my pilot that I did in my class just an anomaly? Did I get lucky? Was it sampling error? Was it because I had a large class and I targeted these slackers? I tried in the gradebook data to identify slackers. Didn't get any traction there. So I just thought, well, it's me, it's my effort. Let me go replicate my own pilot to see if I'm tenured and it does, we can wait. Let me try to replicate it. Now, turns out you change your class over time. I went to replicate my class. Instead of doing 7 homeworks and requiring 5, I shortened them. Had 9 homeworks and decided to make 8 of them mandatory so you wouldn't have as many slackers. So I went to draw the sample of who skipped the first homework, and like 2 people out of 754 didn't do the first homework. Maybe it's because I endogenously responded and tell the students how important the first homework is, that supply and demand is the crux, and if you don't do and don't understand supply and demand, you're not going to do well in my class. So whatever I did worked. I tried to do the sampling after the first homework, and there was no variation. Fortunately, or I should say uniquely, I added this third midterm. So I decided, students pack it in after the first midterm because you're halfway through, they fail, then they just quit and they'll take their F. Now what I do is I literally do the first midterm. I call it more like a quiz, but it's it's a midterm that is essentially over supply-demand equilibrium. Usually get through elasticity, and I give a midterm there. It's like the start of the third week out of the 10-week quarter, which then I drop the lowest midterm score, so the students who do really bad get a wake-up call, and they have time to recover. So I targeted students who failed the first midterm. Ironically, I had almost the exact name number. I was teaching 2 sections with 360 students, and I had almost the same number of students, but just double. Now, when I went down my spreadsheet and did my randomization, I didn't go far enough, so I ended up with 2. I meant to have 69, and I missed 1 student in my treatments. It's balanced because of my own operator error. So I had 68 students in the treatment across the two courses, 70 in the control. I didn't collect the office hours. I have midterms. I call them midterms, but 4 is a final exam. Now I've learned too, you could drop exam number 4. I'll never do that again because all the top students didn't take exam number 4. They just said, okay, I got an A in the class. So people respond to incentives. I teach them that, and they did respond to incentives. So from now on, midterm 4 or the final exam will be mandatory. But I have a lot of outcomes data. I also have the homework scores. I don't have the time spent yet. I've downloaded it, but I haven't had a chance to analyze it yet. Similar results, although they're a little smaller, a little more noisy. What you can see is I gave feedback after midterm 1. Treatment effects is about 5 percentage points on a mean of 63. Is that really right? Yeah, control mean. Midterm 3 must have been really hard. And this stayed constant. And I've kind of beat this data to death trying to figure out why. I mean, I've never had, look, midterm 1.049, midterm 3.5, midterm 4.49, exams. I mean, this is a really consistent. I gave a mid email here, and then I gave another mid email here. So they got two emails, one after midterm 1, one after midterm 3, and about a 10% effect. Given I was targeting students who failed the first midterm, these means are actually quite low, but it's close to about a 10% effect. Again, it's only significant at the 10% level. I don't have grade attendance measured. I implemented I gave extra credit in my class, 5 points out of 500. So you could raise your grade 1 percentage point by using this app called Pocket Points, where you register, and if you come to class and turn your phone off and have the app in the background, it actually, I know how many hours students are in my class using the app. And so then I gave points to students who spent at least 16 hours in class. And surprisingly, a low, only 34% of the students earned this in the control, earned this incentive. So that was at least a noisy measure of attendance. And all these other things are positive and noisy. Did they pass? Did they get a grade of C or higher? Grade of B or higher, etc. I will tell you, I got tons and tons of emails, even more than the last time. Professor Carrell, in all caps, thank you for being an amazing professor for my first ever economics class. Keep doing your best as a professor because you own it. I don't know what that means, but I just want to thank you for not only teaching this course, but also being so dedicated to helping the students thrive and succeed. I've never had a professor email me after receiving a poor grade before. I once again appreciate the concern that you have for your students. By the way, I didn't send these emails out in the intervening 5 years, and I didn't get nice emails like this. I even had this. I'm bummed I didn't see I improved. My grades do not reflect your teaching abilities and how good of a teacher you are. You actually care about us students, and that's honestly very rare in the college environment. This is a student that this is where I actually thinks it matters. This student failed my class. She came to me at the end, and I said, I emailed you twice and you haven't responded. Why haven't, well, I'm just, was afraid. And so she ended up failing the course, but she wrote me this after the fact. I sincerely apologize for not accepting your help earlier. Even though I did not do as well. It is only a reflection of my effort and not you. You gave me an opportunity and I failed to do better. I thank you for your advice to accept help from professors and will take that with me to future classes. So, perhaps this will help this student in the future in her other coursework to seek help and have a great summer. So this was from a student who got an F in my class. All right, so we find some evidence that the intervention generated positive performance. Maybe evidence that the end of course letter grades are two courses of measure. If you notice, my effects are, I have detailed grade data by assignment, and there certainly seems to be, the timing of the emails and performance seem to matter. There's suggestive evidence that the sample may matter. One thing I did not talk about, in our scale up, it turns out people that look like me selected out of the experiment. So we invited 42 professors the first round and 38 the second round, and went back and had RA collect the demographic characteristics of those professors. The group that was likely to select out of participating in the experiment were white male professors. So when I cut the sample, I did a quick look at white male professors who did participate, and there is some evidence that maybe there were positive effects for those professors. I don't want to lean my hat on it, but it at least is some things that we're looking at. I strongly believe that two things matter. Who's delivering it, how they're delivering it, how the professor responds to that information. Because if you send an email out and just say, hey, you did poorly, I'm worried about you, and then you don't actively respond to those students and do something to help them, you wouldn't expect it to matter. I know myself, my wife asked me, I know this is, you're helping these students, but can you possibly manage the schedule? I spent more time teaching last spring than any quarter ever, with 754 students. And I opened up office hours, and then when I opened up office hours, I felt obligated to let other students know. So I probably tripled or quadrupled the amount of time I was spending overall with the students in my class. It was just positively correlated with the students in the treatment group. All right, some things to think about. Maybe it's freshmen, maybe it's lower division courses, maybe it's large classes. At the end of the day, what I would be interested in the last 2 minutes before we're done is to get your feedback and thoughts, given that you're at a CSU, you do teach here, and your thoughts on how to put the bow on this and what do we do next?
So I have two things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was curious, and this is kind of partly tied into this. When you did this big randomization, it's nice that you included all of these different disciplines and all of different courses, but the nature of the course material is so different in a lot of these subjects than others. And I wonder if you think that there might be something about, especially kind of an Econ 1A type setting, when it is, fairly cut and dried. Here are the concrete things you do. Here are the concrete points you lose, the concrete points you gain. Right. Whereas if it's more of a, kind of a, write an essay on this, or like the different type of approach, if you think that might have harder for students to kind of connect the dots on there.
So I certainly think anything's a possibility.
Yeah.
The type of class, the size of the class, who you're targeting, the sample of students you're reaching out to. So I think all of that could matter. Particularly, like you said, my class is very structured. There's a midterm, you get feedback. There's homework that goes along with the next midterm. There's concrete steps. One thing that I did, I collected Rate My Professor data on all the professors, and then I interacted treatment with Rate My Professor ratings. Now these are really bad, none of us all, if you read Rate My Professor, you get wide end of the distribution. One part of the Rate My Professor, I do believe, is students' ratings of the difficulty of the course. So that, I do find this strong negative interaction with course difficulty, meaning the treatment effect is positive for classes that are rated as easier. So maybe that means that if the course gets too difficult, doesn't matter what the professor does, it's hard to bring people across the finish line. Or it's small sample size, and it's just one measure, and I hate to put too much stock in it, but maybe it induces students in classes that they're, if effort or, showing up or, things that you could do to stay in the class and persist when the class is viewed as easy, perhaps, there's something there. Context does matter though. Yep.
I thought so this didn't seem to be borne out in your replication of your pilot, but I thought it was really interesting the way that the higher ability students responded in terms of that they really kind of liked the intervention versus the low ability students who didn't say much. So I was wondering about sort of the kind of negative feedback versus the positive feedback, and whether maybe the way that the negative feedback was delivered by some of the professors in the larger experiment actually didn't have the intended effect?
Yeah, we tried to avoid what we viewed as negative feedback. It was supposed to be positive steps to succeed. So all the emails said, here's how you can do to improve, what you can do to improve. Now, all of my students that I targeted had some sort of shortcoming, whether or not they skipped homework 1 or they failed midterm 1 in the 2 sampling designs. I don't think I answered your question, so I don't know in my own class. That's something that we don't have in for all of our data. Like I could interact it whether for the students that we have the course grade books, interact it with how well you did on the first assignment. I tried doing some of that and didn't find a whole lot. But
so this is probably not worth doing, but I wonder if it would be interesting to have like an RA actually go through kind of the emails from the professors and sort of rate them on some scale of like, okay, this is targeted at a student who didn't do well, but it's written in a positive way versus a negative way.
Yeah, unfortunately we don't have all the email. It was only professors who were willing to give us emails, so I don't have a random sample, or I don't have a census of all the emails. We asked them to send us, the feedback, and this is, I'll have to go to see, I don't even have, because of the IRB protocol, I didn't even actually get to see which professors these were. The RA, the campus we worked with actually de-identified these things and then gave it to them.
So, last thing. How light touch is this intervention?
It sounds like touch until you do it.
No, that's right. And just even thinking about, so taking the students out of it, whether this is worth it for, especially a junior faculty member who wants to up their evaluations, getting an idea of sort of the cost size of how, do you have any idea from the larger scale experiment how much time faculty were spending in this?
I didn't hear as much. So one thing that I learned was different between, or at least I believe is different between my experience and the faculty's experience, is they said, many of the students are commuter students, and they don't come to office hours much. That most of their communication with students is via email. So that could be one major difference, is like the personal interaction is more difficult when students are commuting in a metropolitan school where most of the students don't live on campus. So that could be one major difference. I think I'm about 4 minutes over. I want to thank you for the great data.
Thank you very much, Scott. So we don't have a meeting next week, so happy Thanksgiving. Our final seminar of the semester is on December 5th, when Kit Carpenter from Vanderbilt will be joining us. And you have the schedule for our 13 seminars for the spring, so I hope you will advertise this widely. We have a great set of applied micro people and public labor, health and environmental economics will be joining us. So thank you again. Have a good holiday. Thanks, Scott.